Today, I want to welcome you to our group Veterans in Conversation, brought to you by The Power of Our Story and facilitated by Barry Zworestine, combat medic from the Rhodesian Bush War and currently a psychologist in Australia, and retired United States Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Scott Duncan. My name is Sarah Carell, founder of The Power of Our Story. We are a community where veterans, first responders, and all protectors can connect, share their experiences, and heal together. So with that, I will hand it over to Scott.
Thank you, Sarah. As always, everybody, welcome to Veterans in Conversation. Just like Sarah said, we're of the power of our story. This is a podcast that Sarah had on her heart to get me and Barry together to do some good stuff. And it all just came together so well with the help of a number of folks. Barry's bride has been taking care of this here. If you can see the backdrop, she got that done for us, along with some logo branding that you'll see on LinkedIn and a few other platforms that we use. So I want to give the props on that right up front here. Today is episode number 2. The last episode we had last month, it was essentially Barry and myself kind of introducing ourselves to the audience, giving our why. Why are we doing this? Why do we care to be involved in this space? And then we talked a bit about the foundational structure of what we believe and what we want to be talking about during the episodes. And so that was good. It was just kind of a get to know you thing and giving our why statement. So today, okay, just pop back up. So today we have a special guest with us. We have an author, Rosemary Gattuso. She is the author of It's Not You, It's Me, a chronic overthinker's guide to self-reflection. And when I hear that word overthinker, that's a lot of us. I know I'm included. My wife's up there as well. As a guy who was a logistician in the Marine Corps for 21 years, there was a saying, analysis or paralysis by analysis, right? And at some point, you've got to make a decision and move forward. So it's easy to get into the overthinking mode. But with that said, very excited for this episode today. I'm going to turn it over to Barry. Barry's going to introduce Rosemary and tell you a little bit about her. They're both on the other side of the world and in the Southern Hemisphere. So these two guys, we're glad they're here. It's early in the morning on their side, a little later in the afternoon for us, but very glad to have Rosemary here. And with that, Barry, I'm going to hand it over to you, bud.
Thanks, my friend. And yeah, just to welcome Robin in and Greg, you, my brother from Australia. I was hoping if it was you that you could make it on today. So yeah, maybe we'll get a visual of you at some point. But yeah, so I wanted to run through a couple of things about what really, I was so driven to bring Rosemary on the group. And I'll just read some stuff I put together. It's easier that way. We're really going to look, Rosemary's approach, which I loved, was very much a strength-based reflection that I felt could really transform the way we navigate life's challenges. And certainly what I was thinking of at that point in time was really the life challenges as they are specifically to veterans and first responders. And I mean, in terms of her history, she has a huge history in alternate dispute resolution, family mediation, and restorative justice practices. She's had a lot of time and experience in guiding families through separation and promoting the well-being of children. And we also know that veterans and relationships can be quite disruptive, and that as a result, divorce rates can be quite high. And again, I believe that her book is an effective model as part of a process in which we can enjoy effective family relationships and connections in tribe. What came to me a lot was so many veterans in their journeys really feel quite disconnected, and they feel very lost as they try to re-find identity, belonging, and tribe, and that this does impact on their sense of self. We know that numbers of veterans experience moral injuries, and I don't mean moral injuries just at war. I mean moral injuries from within their own organizations, where their organizations can become the enemy, and that their sense of self is eroded. And Rosemary will talk about that sense of lacking, which was such a profound word that resonated so deeply with me. And it really encapsulated what we feel inside from the point of those injuries. Her book is extraordinary, and I would strongly recommend everybody to purchase the book. Part of what I think she brings in is a couple of things. Identify ways that limit our ability to triumph in the face of adversity. Sometimes I think that our capacity to meet adversity from a balanced and open point of view is not often a strong point for a veteran. To discover ways to catch ourselves overthinking, and we, like many and most humans, do overthink and ruminate, as well as start to take charge of our thinking and recognize how our thinking impacts on the world, and start to identify our strengths that we can bring to the journeys in front of us. And the big one, of course, is to behave yourself when in situations of challenge. And I was saying earlier on that, just when I think I've reached enlightenment, I misbehave, and then I'm back to square one and having to go sort it all out again. I met Rosemary in the Brazilian group, which my wife, Chris, is a part of, and I was just blown away by just her presence and what she brought to the table. So, Rosemary, without further ado, I really want to thank you for taking time to be here on our early Sydney morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, and just looking forward to your presentation, after which we'll stop the recording, and then it's a wonderful time for us all to have some great questions and delve deeply into the things that resonate with us. So your process now, Rosemary. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. I'm really happy to be here and quite honoured to be able to share my story with you. And also, I really connected with the title, The Power of Our Story, because what I'm going to share is really about the story that we tell ourselves, the default story that we tell ourselves, and how that impacts the quality of our thoughts. And, I thought a good place to start is by just sharing a bit about the inspiration behind my book and the concepts, because I'm sitting here today with predominantly a legal background. So it's not sort of the natural progression to then look into self-reflection, but it was also quite pivotal to how I got to where I am. And I guess part of that is, I went from law to becoming a family mediator, where my role is really to help guide, challenging conversations, and I'll also work with, in restorative justice conferences, again, where it's about being that independent third party to help guide challenging conversations. And what I learnt from that role is the importance of non-judgment. So this idea of non-judgment is something that I hold throughout my book. And what I noticed is that when I was working as a mediator, that if my clients felt judged, they would be the first to put their hand up and tell me, and it would be really hard to work with them. That, that's where I could potentially risk a complaint, but it highlighted the importance of non-judgment. And so what I'll share today is about ways that we can perhaps be our own mediator for our own, self-analysis and situations, and exercise non-judgment. And, I guess another thing, while I was working as a mediator, I became really interested in the human behavior and why people respond to situations, the ways that they do. Because what I was noticing is that I might be working with two families with very similar circumstances, but get very different outcomes. So that really sparked my curiosity and sort of led me towards, studying about, the neurobiology of trauma and also childhood development, and to sort of to give more meaning to what I was seeing in the mediation room. And it also got me really interested in trauma and the way that trauma is presented and explored, and more so the emphasis on healing, because we can have conversations about trauma, but the importance is on the healing. But what I noticed, working in my work about trauma, is that it's not about the impact. It's not about the event or a series of events, but about the impact on the individual. And that impact is on their sense of self. And when I talk about sense of self, I refer to an individual's ability to believe in themselves, how much that is impacted. And Barry touched on the use of the word the lacking. And that's a common theme throughout my book, talking about this lacking view that we can have of ourselves. And when we're in that view, it's quite hard to believe in ourselves. And then, in relation to trauma, it's also about the quality of interactions. So the quality of interactions, where there's interactions that focus on what's wrong, they can result in trauma or have an incident that has a traumatic impact on an individual. But the same can be said for healing. Healing is about interactions, that we have, but they focus on what's strong. They have the opposite sort of spin or quality or focus, and they can contribute to healing as well. And it's also important to note that that also includes our interactions with ourselves, our overthinking, our self-talk, and those conversations, the way we analyze what we have done or what we haven't done. And I also noticed that we can learn not only from what's happening, but what's not happening. And that's sometimes, because if we take one path or one view, then there's always the opposite that we haven't taken. And when I applied the strengths-based theory to this idea of what's happening and what's not happening, we have two potential paths that we can take, or even just in terms of our thought processing. And one is what's wrong, and the alternate is what's strong. And they're the two options that we can have or take in our thoughts, feelings, and actions towards a situation, towards our external environment, and even when reflecting on our behaviour or the way we have responded in the past, and even it could be future as well. So they're I guess that really stems from my work as a mediator in the way people manage adversity, but then provided this really, I say simple, a simple tool or way to label what's happening and what's not happening. And, one thing that I will emphasize here is that it's more about learning from the times when we did go down the path of what's wrong than staying on the path of what's strong the entire time, because that's where there's room for personal growth and development. And it would be almost impossible to always be on the what's strong side and be positive about everything, because there are things that do challenge us and can bring us down. So that's really what I want to share today. And I'll throughout the book, I present these concepts one by one and build on them through reflection tasks that are designed to help you look at your own scenario, apply the theory to what's happening or what's been important for you at your own pace. And so and also what I'm proposing can feel a little bit harder or slower where there has been a significant traumatic impact. So it might feel like 2 steps forward, 10 steps back. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So if we look at this idea of what's wrong and what's strong, I like to visualize a T intersection where we've got 2 paths that we can take. And whichever path we take, once we walk down that path, we continually receive more evidence to support that narrative or that story. And so what I saw was, okay, well, if we've taken one path, there's also the path we haven't taken. And what can we learn from that? But I mean, it's very simple in that idea, but there's many layers that contribute or influence which path we take. And if we look at biology to start with, then, as a species, we survived and evolved by really continually being on the lookout for threat, and it wasn't only that sort of survival mechanism, but there's also this idea of negative bias, that we will remember and focus on the negative, more than we do the positive. So that biologically we're designed to be paranoid and negative. Then we also have our early childhood experience that can set our default. Were we in an environment where the focus was on what's wrong as the default, or was it on what's strong? Or did we have experiences that resulted in us having to adapt to our environment to then go for the what's wrong path? And I mean, that in itself is a big topic. But I just wanted to, present it here as a factor that might also make changing these what's wrong to what's strong, or reflecting on it more challenging, because it's always been the default. And then again, we have our own experience, and the work and the way that you have been trained that might also lean towards what's wrong as a default, because that was your role.
Hey,
all the way.
Rosemary, if I can ask a quick question here, this is very
Sure.
interesting. My mind's starting to go here, and so what you're saying, if I understand this, really, no matter who you are and where you are on this globe, right, because of our DNA and how we've survived over, millennia, most folks tend to focus on the what's wrong instead of what's strong. Is that kind of where you're going? Because I know for me, I'm very critical of myself, and a lot of times I'll get caught into the, kind of the negative things, and well, why didn't I do this? Why didn't, instead of thinking, hey, you did that pretty good, and here's some good things to learn from that. I tend to kind of shift to the negative. Are you saying that most of us do that because we're wired that way? Is that kind of
Yeah,
what you're saying?
that's definitely a contributing factor. And then it's our external experience that can either build on or sort of take away from that as the default. Because if you look at the experience as evidence of which path to take, evidence of what I need to do to survive,
Right.
and just if you're in a family situation where there's a perfectionist parent or a critical parent, then even that can be enough to really highlight the what's wrong lens.
Right. Yeah. And that's it's very layered, isn't it? And it could be hard to when things start stacking up like that, it could be hard to focus on, the strong part and,
Yes, and
needing help to get there.
that's right. And it's not even, not about, blaming parents or situations, because sometimes, like, if you are a perfectionist, it's because you strive to do your best. But the implication potentially for a child is I'm not good enough unless I'm perfect. And so the default then can be on the lacking and the what's wrong. And it's sort of
Absolutely.
an unintentional sort of byproduct.
Right. And I'm glad you said that, because as a parent, I got two daughters, then you hear stories from them about things that you're thinking, man, I don't even recall that. But, but there's grace to being a parent too, right? Because the things that you're doing, you may feel, very forthright about what it is you're doing and why. And they just might not understand because they're young, or, their perspective isn't there. And maybe you didn't do a good of a job explaining it and trying to reinforce what you believe as you think you did, especially if they're perceiving it differently. Maybe there's a communication thing there, or maybe it's just that time between generations. But yeah, I've found myself in that too, not only as a kid, but as a parent. That's very enlightening.
No, thank you. And I think just to touch on that, what I'm finding is that there's more and more children who are highly sensitive and then will take on their surroundings more intensively because they're biologically more sensitive to their surroundings.
Right. Wow. Thank you.
So then if we look at this idea of what's wrong and what's strong, then they're both quite different. When we are going down the path of what's wrong, it feels much heavier. It looks at past mistakes. There's a lot of judgment, blame, maybe even resentment, worries. This is where we're in overthinking mode, because what I propose is that overthinking is an analysis of a situation that focuses on what's wrong. So, our self-talk, we beat ourselves up over past mistakes. It's that excessive analysis and really doubting ourselves, blaming others, catastrophizing, and there's generally a deficit or a potential for a loss when we're in this mode. It might look like jumping to conclusions or making a negative assumption to prevent something bad from happening. And this is the way of thinking that I refer to as the lacking in my book. And I use a series of, I guess, opposites to describe, or words to describe what comes under what's wrong. But judgment, criticism, blame, staying in the past, and I'll get through that as we progress. But you can come up with your own. It's just anything that would come under what's wrong. So you can have your own that's specific to your scenario as well. But we'll get to that. Whereas, as I said, when we're on the path of what's wrong, we collect more evidence to support that narrative. And it's the same for when we take the path of what's strong. As we walk down that path, we come across more evidence to support that story or that version as well. And it feels much lighter. And we're able to stay more present in the current situation and also able to plan for the future and make future decisions. And we're more guided by logic rather than, potentially jumping to conclusions. There's room for hope. The self-talk is more encouraging. And then even when we do make mistakes, we're able to explore it from a learning opportunity rather than, beat ourselves up for a mistake. Now, I can see that there's a hand. Shall we?
Hi, my name is Callie, and I was just going to ask if our brains are kind of, and you may be getting to this, wired to maybe, or not wired, but they go to the negative. How, other than sheer practice, do we help ourselves to go to the strong instead of the negative?
Yeah, and I will get to more specific practices, but you're spot on. It's about practice and reflect that awareness of the times that we have gotten down the path of what's wrong, because that's where we can learn. That's where there's opportunity for growth. But I will explore on specific ways to do that. So thank you. So if we have this sort of heavy what's wrong and a much lighter what's strong, and what's wrong, in what's wrong we have overthinking as an analysis of a situation that focuses on what's wrong. Then when we look at the opposite, which I call the strength, what's strong, then reflection I would then define as an analysis of a situation that focuses on what's strong. So if you can do one, you can do the other. It's the same skill set. It's just perhaps giving a different focus, or even just reflecting on the times that we did go down the path of what's wrong. And I after learning about these ways of labeling situations, it's hard to not see it in everyday life. And, just a couple of days ago, I was just, on my way walking down the street, and I was analyzing a situation, and it was very trivial, but I couldn't help but realize that everything that was coming up was focusing on what's wrong. So, and it really highlighted to me how ingrained it can be, and how ever present it can be. But just that, and that in that moment, I kind of stopped myself, because I realized that I was going down the path of what's wrong. And that's where the gold is, in those little moments. And it doesn't have to be for major life transitions or major events. It can be just that over analysis of a situation that really isn't important, but there's learning opportunity there. And so, and where there is that learning opportunity, then there's also room for that personal growth and resilience, because this is about helping us to then navigate adversity when we do come across a personal challenge. Then our ability to then process that is hopefully going to be improved. The more growth we have, and the more ability we have to see ourselves through the lens of what's strong, or take that approach with ourselves. And so, if to give you some more specific ideas or ways to use these what's wrong and what's strong, in my book I call it the scales of self-reflection. And essentially, if you imagine a horizontal line with two arrows on the end pointing in opposite directions. On one side you have what's strong, and on the other side you have what's wrong. And so you can either be closer to one side or another in any situation. We're going to be closer to what's wrong or closer to what's strong. And then if we look at all the things that we do, or ways of thinking or being, that can come under what's strong, then like the first one I said was judgment. What's the opposite of judgment? In my book, I propose the opposite of judgment is understanding. So we're either going to be closer to judgment or understanding at any given point in time. And this judgment and understanding is quite important to me and crucial to me and helpful in my role as a mediator, because one of the first things I say to clients is, I'm not here to judge. And having that visualization of, or just the words, judgment and understanding, can help me when I might potentially be getting stuck and not even realizing that I might be, pushing the conversation in one direction because of my own judgment. Then, okay, how can I show more understanding? And it's also about how we show judgment and understanding in our own self-talk. Then the second example I will give is criticism. When we're showing criticism, there's not much room for respect. So we're going to be either closer to criticism or respect at any given point in time. And the idea is to look at what's happening from the what's wrong perspective, and then what's the opposite, what's not happening. And so you can make up your own, to fit in with whatever the situation is, or whatever the circumstances, or even to match your own language. These are examples that I saw in mediation room. And another one is when we have a focus on the past, we're more in the what's wrong phase, and it's harder to make decisions about the future. But the opposite would be when we're more future focused and in the present. Additionally, I'll give you, there's when we're in victim mode, then then there's less room for us to be in that empowerment mode. And denial and acceptance. It's sort of playing with opposites. And in my book, I go through the specific examples, like some of them that I have mentioned here, and expand on those. But as I said, you can make up your own. It's whatever is relevant for your situation and your language. And just remember, it's about learning from what's happening and what's not happening. Let that also be your guide. But I guess I found that what's wrong, and that's what strong sort of way of labeling things, it's hard to forget. So that's the starting point. You've got two ways to define or label what's happening or what's not happening as a starting point for reflection. And when we're in overthinking mode, we're in what's wrong mode. When we're in reflection mode, we're in what's strong mode. And that's where there's ability for personal growth, which is going to increase our resilience and ability to handle adversity, and also build on our sense of self, our ability to believe in ourselves. And that's really important also for those times where we want to start something new, or we have an idea or something that we want to follow, and the external stimulus or the people around us are telling us what's wrong with our ideas or why it's not going to work. But when we believe in ourselves, then it's easier for us to then just keep moving forward and put less emphasis on what other people are saying. And so that's I guess the first part of what's wrong and what's strong. Then the second concept that I would add to that and build on that is that it's multidimensional, in that it encompasses our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. So that, when we are approaching a situation, then if one of those three, thoughts, feelings, or actions, is focusing on what's wrong, it might mean that we have repeat hurdles in that particular area of our life. And it's sometimes not that obvious. Well, often it's not that obvious, because, I might, and it could also be that I have a goal, but I've put conditions on it. And that condition is then stopping me from reaching my goal or achieving my goal. It's a third party, or it's external. No, it's an external event potentially. But then it means my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions are not consistent. And so an example that I use is, say, going for a job interview. I might have the best CV and the best experience, but then in the interview, whether or not I realize or not, I don't believe that I'm the best person for the job. And that is reflected in the way I respond to the questions, the way I present myself. It could even be, I've got a softer voice, very, very subtle, and then I don't get the job. Or I apply for something and I think there's someone else who's better suited. And that also filters through in my thoughts, my feelings, and actions. So that, there's some of them might be under what's wrong and others are under what's strong. But the stronger lens is the what's wrong, and that's what filters through. And I guess for me, this was quite obvious in my career, and where up until I became a mediator, and I was more in sort of traditional law and negotiation type settings, the roles that I was, I guess, going for, the roles that I aspired to have, they really focused on what's wrong in me, my weaknesses. They didn't highlight my strengths. And that sort of kept me in that view of myself that I wasn't good enough, that I needed to apply for a promotion, I needed to do some more training. There was always this lacking, I had some kind of deficit, and that's why I wasn't getting the promotion. And that what I was being asked to do actually highlighted my weaknesses rather than my strengths. Then when I became a mediator, I was working in an organization that was strengths-based. That's how I was introduced to these concepts. And I was given on a daily basis evidence of my strengths. I was given work that also promoted and supported my personality and my way of being. And the actual role of a mediator highlighted my strengths more than my weaknesses, but the traditional sort of legal setting did the opposite. And so what happened there is this like really significant shift in my professional development, but also my personal development, because I was getting evidence as to why I should believe in myself, evidence of what's strong on a daily basis through my work. And I believed it. And so here we have this external forces, I guess, external stimulus having such an impact on the internal. But it was also from me as well, because I changed my narrative. The external helped, and it also helped in when I was more in the legal sort of setting. It helped me to also see that I was in a situation that I didn't want, because it was continually highlighting on what's wrong, and it helped me to write this book. So, and see things from this perspective. But it also highlighted the multidimensional aspect, our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. Because I know I had the best CV. I was always applying, and I didn't go anywhere, because it wasn't for me. But I didn't believe it, and then I'd see people who were less qualified go ahead. And it was that was the missing link that I would say, and even anytime, this is a very simple sort of approach. I think, okay, I'm going to get healthy. I'm going to clean up what I'm eating. I'm going to start walking. I'm going to do this and this and then, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it really depends on, and my thoughts and my feelings and my actions. I might say, I'll walk in summer because there's more daylight. And then when summer comes, I want to go out. I want to go to the beach. I'm going to do this. I'll go in winter. And then when winter comes, I'll say, oh, it's too dark. It's too cold. So that's also a simple one that I've been guilty of. But just to sort of show, well, am I under what's wrong or what's strong in my thoughts and my feelings and my actions? And the clue is what's actually happening. I'm not getting healthy. I'm not walking. I'm still eating more junk that I would like to, very superficial example, but just to really demonstrate the concepts and how much they can get overlooked as well. And we don't even realize. So yeah, I am on a health, kickstart. I'm doing all the things, but my thoughts and my feelings and my actions aren't aligned, or they're not staying through the what's strong lens long enough for there to be a result. And, I guess this, so that's the idea of the multidimensional approach, our thoughts, our feelings and actions, which can come under what's wrong or what's strong. And now the next point that I would like to introduce is this idea of who the characters are. Because there's always two characters in this story. It's the self and the other. And the other can include situation, scenarios. It's just all the external stimulus. It can be people, experience, it can be a person, but anything that's external to us. And here it's about, where are we placing the spotlight? Are we placing the spotlight on ourselves through a lens of what's wrong, or through a lens of what's strong? Or are we placing the spotlight on others through a lens of what's strong or what's wrong? And I should note that a lot of the external stimulus that at the moment tends to focus on what's wrong. If you turn the TV on, or you turn, anything on a screen can contribute to us viewing a view of ourselves that is in a lacking or in deficit. It's our view and we can change it, but it makes it harder when there's a lot of that comparison or negative comparison, and just what's wrong, or sometimes when we see what's strong in others, it can remind us of what's wrong with ourselves. And that's where we've put the spotlight on them, because we're setting, I guess, our standards and our measurements and our view of ourselves against someone else, as opposed to against ourselves, measuring our own situation, our worth, our goals against us, the person that we were potentially, 6 months ago or 5 years ago or whatever time frame. It gives us an uneven sort of playing field. And then, so yeah, again, where is the spotlight on? And sometimes this can be by implication. And an example that I like to use, which isn't necessarily controversial or a bad thing, it's something that I do all the time, but to illustrate the concepts is, I ask other people for their advice before I make a decision, if it's, big or small. That's something I'm quite guilty of. And that's fine. I mean, there are people who, professionals that we go to and get advice, or, people that we know who are just have these strengths in these specific areas, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I guess the implication is that my opinion or my view or instinct about that situation is not enough, that it might be wrong, that I might make a mistake. And so that, I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with asking for someone else's opinion or help, but if it's that continual process where the focus is always on me from the lacking point of view, from what's wrong, then, that's where it's about, well, how can we then put the spotlight back on ourselves so that we trust our decision. And if it doesn't turn out to be the best decision, well, we've learned from it. So do we have time for me to read from my book? Yeah. So, and I've got a section on comparisons, and I think it's quite relevant in today's society with so much external stimulus that really impacts our view of ourselves and can put us as a default onto the path of what's wrong for ourselves. So in my book, I've got a troubleshooting guide that just proposes ways to help us in this process to learn from our own lenses or approaches. And it's called Comparisons. Not only is the grass greener on the other side, it's a huge meadow filled with fragrant flowers, birds, a pond, and bunny rabbits. It resembles a Monet painting, making my side look like a frameless painting of a bunch of dying weeds and dried animal excrement. The power of the characteristics of the lacking can be dramatically amplified when comparing yourself to others, something that, of course, I routinely did, and that would inevitably leave me with a void and a deficit self that would only continue to grow. One that would see me privately berate myself as I focused on my perceived shortcomings, or that would result in knee-jerk reactions. I noticed that what I had done was place the spotlight on them, the others, while demoting myself to the shadows. Why can the strength of another send us into lacking and judgment of self? Here we see the magnitude and impact of our perceptions and observations of the other, leading to a deficiency of the self, in which the other is the standard of measurement. The challenge is to catch ourselves out and apply the "it's not you, it's me" principle, placing the spotlight back on the self and using the self as a starting point. This means we are measuring our achievements against the personal goals we have set for ourselves, as opposed to measuring our own achievements against those of others. This might look like comparing your past self with your present self, placing the spotlight on your growth and learning. And so here, wherever the spotlight is on, wherever the spotlight's shining on, whatever it's not shining on is being dimmed out. So that's really what I want you to remember in that. Is it focusing on what's wrong or what's strong in relation to myself or others? And again, sometimes it's not that obvious. So, they are really the main concepts that I explore. And what I'll do next is go through how to put these in practice. So we've got that our thoughts, feelings, and actions can either be under what's wrong or what's strong. And then there's also the added layer of who are the main characters, the self and the others. Where is the spotlight facing? In all those concepts, it's about where is the spotlight facing. Now, in practice, because I did start off by saying that biologically, we're wired really to focus on what's wrong. So then one way that we can sort of target the biology is then through a meditative practice. And so, I've grown to see meditation as a form of exercise for the brain. And for me, again, I continually go back to this concept of learning from what's happening and what's not happening. When I stop meditating, I become more reactive and more irritable. And that's, what I really noticed after I think I stopped meditating. It was quite after going months of daily meditation, even just a short practice. I stopped and, within a couple of months, I noticed, gee, I'm not really handling things as well as I could have. And not only as well as I could have, but as well as I have in the past. And I put that down to meditation, because what meditation does is that it builds on the parts of your brain that will enhance that, emotional regulation and memory and anything that will help your reflective process. Whereas and it also tones down the parts of the brain that will focus on the fear and the anxiety and the stress. So it's sort of, two birds with one stone in that. And I guess one thing that I would say is that to find a practice that works with you, and also to acknowledge that sometimes it's hard. Often it's hard to clear the mind of clutter or chatter and overthinking, so that it could be that you might sit down for 5 minutes and there's only 1 minute of clarity in that 5 minutes, and that's fine. How can we see what's strong in our practice, and then even that 1 minute a day is going to have benefits, because it's about that consistency. And if you get sick of whatever the type of practice is, then just find something that works, because we do outgrow. It's like exercise. When we do the same routine for a couple of weeks, then we get sick of it, and our muscles get used to it as well. Try something else. So I guess that's the first point that I would add as something that you can do. And it could even be a walking meditation. It doesn't have to be. It's whatever is going to work with you, and something that you can keep up. Then another sort of troubleshooting guide or ways to put these ideas in practice stems from my legal background. So I noticed, I do have a tendency to jump to negative conclusions or make negative assumptions about situations. And, having a legal background, then, I was actually caught out making a negative assumption to someone who also has a legal background. And they just looked at me and said, how can you say that? You've studied law. You've done law. How can you make such an unsubstantiated claim? And I realized how much emphasis I was putting on something that I had no evidence for, and that there was an opportunity to then look at how can we apply the rules of evidence to overthinking, to jumping to conclusions, and jumping to negative conclusions or making negative assumptions. Something bad going to happen unless I do X, Y, Z. That sort of way of thinking. So if we apply the rules of evidence, then the rules of evidence really dictate what's admissible in court and what's not admissible. What evidence can the judge rely on? So then I thought, okay, well, if my thoughts would not be admissible in court, then perhaps I should reconsider how much weight I put on it. And sometimes that can just be enough to sort of snap that that negative assumption or jumping to conclusions. And so for something to be admissible in court, there has to be a witness. It has to be able to be verified. I mean, I'm going off Australian, but it's quite sort of common elsewhere. But it has to be something that can be verified by a witness. So that excludes an opinion, that excludes an assumption, that excludes gossip. So anything that there's no real evidence for, it can't be verified by a person or a document or something to show that this is true, then perhaps we should reconsider how much weight we give it. And then when you look at it through the lens of what's wrong and what's strong, most of the times they focus on what's wrong. And I'll give you an example that once I did make a negative assumption about a situation. I was extremely disappointed, based on what I assumed. Then a few months later, I learned some new information that showed how wrong I was. And then I realized how disappointed, how upset, how much sort of the negative impact that it had on me, because I just took it that it was true and it wasn't. And then I thought, well, how many times have I made an assumption and went with it and I didn't get that extra information? And I don't know. I never. So relying on the rules of evidence can help just to trigger that, well, is this assumption based on what's wrong or what's strong? To help that, because they're normally based on what's wrong. So, and I guess like most legal principles, there are exceptions. And the exception to this rule is intuition. When we're in that what's wrong mode already, or we're stuck and we have to make a decision and we're quite stressed, sometimes we can interpret a negative assumption as intuition. So that's the challenge. And look, just a note here is that intuition, by definition, is void of conscious reasoning. So if there's a logical sequence, then it's most likely to be an assumption rather than intuition. It's not I guess it's not set in stone, but this is what I have found and what has sort of helped me, to help clarify that. Because otherwise, when you are in a challenging time, it's a perfect time for intuition to come in and help guide. But how much have we already gone into the what's wrong lens to then make it that intuition a judgment? So that's just there. And then I guess the third point I would or practice, which I've been saying and sharing throughout this talk, is about assessing the quality of your thoughts. Do they come under what's wrong or what's strong? Use your own language for your own, it could even be like, am I focusing on the despair or the hope? There's a whole, range of ways to really define that, find a way that works for you, and use that to help guide the quality of your thoughts, because it's not about staying on the what's strong path the whole time. It's about learning from the times that we haven't, because that's where there's personal growth. It's quite unrealistic. If we set out to stay on the path of what's strong, then we're going to be disappointed. And it's really going to highlight what's wrong, when we can't stick to it. But the goal is to learn from the times we haven't. And then I guess then that might mean that then the reflection time between this, going from what's wrong to what's strong, or just thinking, if the reflection time might come shorter, if that makes sense. Like we realize, okay, I did that. But then again, there might be different areas of your life where going towards the what's strong path, or reflecting on it, or having that realization is going to be easier than other parts of your life, other scenarios, because there might be areas where it's easier for us to see our own strengths. But that can change. So there's no, fixed rule about it, just that be guided by where you're at that point in time. And then I guess this leads to the next point, which is don't aim for perfection. Again, it's about that that it's about the growth rather than trying to stay in that positive sort of mind frame. It's unrealistic to eliminate the overthinking. It's only or eliminate going to the path of what's wrong. So that's where it's also about seeing our own strengths in that process, in that thought process, and not being so hard on ourselves, because there is there's always a benefit, a learning from it. And so the last point, which I have touched on a little bit, is on the fact that we are bombarded by negative stimulus. So it might mean that we can maybe disconnect from some of those negative influences when we can, and it could be experiences, situations, people. I mean, I do put social media sort of in this category, because when we are seeing ourselves through the what's wrong lens, or have a tendency to go down that path as the default, then social media can put us deeper on that path. So if that's the case, I mean, I'm not blaming social media, but if that's going to contribute to a deficit of self, it's going to contribute to you not being able to believe in yourself as much, then maybe, have a detox, shut it out a bit. And it's sort of any experience or situation that leads you to focus on what's wrong in yourself, and it's something that you can control, that you can sort of push to the side for a bit, then maybe disconnect. And I guess the opposite is that, are there any practices or situations that you can engage in that help focus on the what's strong, and your view of yourself? And I mean, one thing for me is that, it might sound a little bit nerdy, is that I really like making to-do lists. And I thought about, why do I like this so much? And why does it, and it wasn't so much about what was on the list, but it was how it made me feel, because it made me feel like I've achieved something. I felt good about myself. So that's a practice that focuses on what's strong that I can do with myself. So it could also be about finding those small practices that you can do with yourself, or have with yourself, those habits that help you to see your strength. So, yeah, so I guess it's really about an awareness of which path we've taken and which path we haven't taken, and using that as a starting point for reflection and personal growth.
Well, Rosemary, what did I jump in? Did you finish, or?
I finished, yes.
Then I'll jump to Scott. But Rosemary, it's this, you take us into this world. I've never seen anybody have the capacity to create a map of an internal world in such a profound, simple and profound way. And it's so profound that I always experience your talk when you do speak, and I read your book. It's so dynamic, yet so uncomfortable, because not from what you've said, but because I know personally, I feel myself squirm, because I know when I'm stuck on the wrong. And that wrong, I think, is so much a product of the wounds of our past. Certainly veterans and first responders, we come out with management maps and communication strategies that also impact and can make things very wrong in a number of levels. But the gift of the discomfort is that it makes us self-reflect and grow. And I mean, I almost feel like there's something so huge in what you bring. I could almost imagine more conversations with you over time, as we have time to digest this, read the book, and come up with some more questions. So I know at one point you did mention to me that there's a possibility, and this is just the beginning. It's like a massive smorgasbord, and you just can't eat too much, but you got to finish the whole table. So, Rosemary, thanks so much. And Sarah, Scott, before we close off the recording, um, things you'd like to add as well, and then we can close off the recording and get into questions.
Hey, thanks, Barry. I just want to say, great choice. Our first guest on here could not have been any more impactful. The footprint that you've just put down is a very large one for the folks that will come after you. So that's good. You're upping the game for for everybody here, which is a very positive thing. But I've got two very full pages of notes here to refer back to, and um, I, I'm going to get the book, uh, but I'm also going to order it for my daughters because I think there's so much good in what you're saying. And to Barry's point about the self-reflection, that's the hard work, right? It's very easy to be negative. That becomes a go-to, because it's just easy. It's harder to do the strong part and the what's good part and the reflective stuff because that takes time, it takes creativity, it takes a desire to really take actions. So I think maybe if you have a penchant for laziness, boy, you're really doubling down, right? on the negative aspects of what you do and how you live. Yeah, this is very powerful, and I am thankful that Barry and you connected, and that you were our first guest. Uh, for me, when you started talking about the meditation part, being able to slow down and the goodness with that, I find that with prayer and with being outside as well. Those two things really build me up, from the ground up internally. That it helps me stay focused. And like you, Rosemary, when you realize you haven't been doing those things, and it's funny because you should just kind of know that that's what's wrong, but there's a gap there. Then you realize, oh, I haven't been doing that. Okay, that's why. And I find when I start my days, doing those things, my days tend to be better days because I'm ready for the day. I've got the right mindset. I'm focused, and I'm thinking about the right strong. I've reflected on the things that aren't so good, the wrong things, and that really does set me for a more successful day. It doesn't mean I'm always gonna get there, but at least I'm armed and ready, right?
Yeah, and it's
But
about being better equipped to manage
yes,
those daily challenges. And something that jumps out for me from what you've said is also gratitude.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
a gratitude practice is also, again, another sort of interaction that we can have with ourselves that can help build on our ability to believe in ourselves and our ability to see what's strong.
this has been fantastic, and again, thank you so much for being our first guest.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been
Oh,
wonderful, and I'm looking forward to coming back and having more
sure.
conversations. So
Yeah, and I know Sarah's going to probably want to, I know Sarah's got some good stuff coming your way here, but I also just want to, as a reminder, before we do close out, give you a chance if there's anything else, that you want to share with us, anything you want to, kind of wrap this up in before we turn off the camera and go to, uh, excuse me, stop recording and then go to
yeah.
questions that folks may have.
Okay.
Sarah?
Yeah, Rosemary, thank you. Thanks so much for being on here and sharing everything that you have learned. And, the power of our story attracts people that have experienced something traumatic, even if it's the trauma of transition, of losing their identity, or things that you would are a critical incident for the law enforcement, or combat veterans, what they have to go through, or civilians. There's plenty of trauma in the civilian world too. And I love what Barry said, how it just seems like you have this beautiful map that you created for our internal self. And it was so funny. I wrote in big letters too. Oh gosh, this is gratitude and thankfulness. And it was just it's really encouraging. Again, just great nuggets to kind of give clarity in how we can practice these exercises and really catch ourselves. Are we wrong or are we strong right now? Great everyday, present day language to spiritual principles on so many different levels. And it was just great. It was just a basket of golden nuggets. So, Rosemary, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I'm always looking for ways to share and connect, because I do believe I can see the impact that it's had on me, and I guess if and how much it has helped me and has worked for me. So I'm really happy to hear all this feedback, and really grateful for the opportunity. And I guess the last thing I would add is that, if I wasn't an overthinker, I wouldn't have written this book, because it was my tendency to analyze, everything, my external surroundings, that resulted in taking this path. So it's, and that's really crucial part of the concepts that, that I'm sharing. How can we really transform our ways of thinking?
Maybe we can get into questions now with just turn off the recording for a bit, I think.